Is mankind stupid or just ignorant? That's a strange question to be suddenly asked, and I feel like it's been nagging at my mind lately. It doesn't come from nowhere. I was in Italy just the other day. There was some kind of event, or I believe it was a political rally going on. I wasn't paying much attention, I admit. I care very little for human politics and leaders, so don't bother asking me who I'd vote for in any given human election. I wouldn't, for one thing. But for another thing, it just never interested me. What's so special about a politician, or a king, or a governor, or a senator? They all live, they all die, they all suffer, they all rejoice. You put one in a fancier suit than the other, and somehow they have some form of authority higher than anyone else. I never understood it. I apologize. The rally was a bit loud for me, so I ducked out of it and made my way towards an open area where I could see the sun shining. I wasn't far from my next appointment, so I took a moment to just enjoy the fresh air. I was in the form of a child that day. I was small, unnoticeable, and I didn't want to be noticed. I was just content to enjoy the moment, trying to bask in natural beauty and peace of mind, peace of body, having escaped a mob of very loud and, albeit patriotic, humans. The air was warm, if a little muggy. I remember the birds were singing, and I tried to hear their song and put words to it just for fun. It's one of my many pastimes. The trees weren't blowing, for there was practically no wind. Or maybe the buildings around us were preventing any wind from getting through. I was enraptured in the simplistic and the mundane, something that I think humans as a whole struggle to understand. And as I partook in this, there was a gruff cough behind me, and I turned to see a man reading something on his phone. He just sneered and shoved the phone back into his pocket. "Are people just stupid or just ignorant?" he asked out loud. I didn't think he was talking to me. I was trying not to be noticed. And yet, I wonder why he asked it. Had he been reading something important on his phone? Was it about the political situation going on? I wasn't entirely sure, but the question stayed with me all the same. Are humans stupid or ignorant? I've taken some time to think about this question, and I wish I could find him again and tell him what I think. To tell him the truth. The truth is, I don't think man is stupid. Quite the opposite. I'm fascinated by mankind. The ingenuity and the marvels that mankind is capable of astound me even to this day. Stupidity, as far as I'm concerned, is the lack of intelligence or intellectual capability, and mankind is fully capable of intelligent thought and discovery if they want it. There are stupid humans, but quite often it is their choice to be stupid. It does not speak to the species as a whole. So no, humanity isn't stupid. Is humanity ignorant, therefore? Yes, I would say that ignorance is a defining quality of man. Humanity has this uncanny ability to convince itself that if something is not, then it cannot exist, and if it is in their mind, then it must be in reality, regardless of evidence to the contrary or common sense dictating otherwise. Mankind is a stubborn, stiff-necked, and very ignorant, perhaps willfully at times, people. Still ignorant all the same. For example, a man walks by me on his way to work. I stand there clear as day, right beside the road, because in 3 seconds he will walk out into the middle of that road, too busy looking at his phone to notice the "Don't Walk" sign, and then get splattered to the asphalt, where then he'll look up at my face as I collect his soul from his broken shell of a body. In his mind, there was no walking sign, there was no stoplight, none of that existed. Only the phone, only the contents of the item in his hand. To him, he was ignorant to the danger, so caught up in his own world of social media, telephone conversation, or whatever hobby was striking him at the time, that the reality around him was not nearly as important to take in. It's not a lack of intelligence that led to his demise, but willful ignorance to the world around him. If he'd paid attention, he might have noticed. He might have waited. Or would he? Now that I come to think of it, would the knowledge of my presence prevent people from having to deal with me? Could the awareness of me make me more avoidable? That's logical. After all, if the mouse is aware of the cat, it has a better chance to avoid detection. But then it's also not a certainty. After all, a fish might well be aware of the fisherman, but still get caught in the net all the same. I need to ponder on that further. I digress. Back to my point about ignorance. I think mankind is stubbornly ignorant to the point of a fault. I do not believe it is always intentional, rather. I think it stems from a dual sense of superiority or self-centeredness. Mankind is very good about shutting out the things that are inconvenient to them or their wants. If a man is homeless and uses every paycheck he gets to feed a drug addiction, it couldn't possibly be his fault. It couldn't possibly be that he dropped out of college, ran with drug dealers for a time until his ring got busted up. His girlfriend, who'd had a baby with him, left him because he wouldn't and couldn't support them, or that he threatened his own mother with a knife if she didn't give him some drug money, so she cut him off from the family entirely. No, none of that could be the reason. Nothing that he did. Rather, it must be that the government in power is unfair to the underprivileged, that his mother never loved him, that his girlfriend is a money-hungry harlot, and that college just never gave him a fair chance. No, none of it is ever his fault. In his mind, it couldn't possibly be. Mankind is very good at creating walls around themselves to shut out truth and ignore responsibility and reality, and that is ignorance at its most distasteful. I can recount this poor man's story so well because it's a story I see played out far more often than I think is comfortable to admit or think about. You might think to yourself, well, the story you just told is the story of a very stupid man who's making excuses. No, it's a story of a man who was very intelligent but chose not to practice his intelligence, who chose to shut himself away from the world and make excuses rather than look inwardly. That's ignorance. It says nothing about his intelligence. He could very well have been a very intelligent man. But the most intelligent man in the world who shuts himself off from reality, who pretends it doesn't exist, who ignores truth, well, there's no evidence of intelligence in him. And without the evidence, how could you know? On some level, I don't think ignorance is entirely unwarranted or unnatural in all cases. A king does not make himself aware of the goings-on of each of his peasants, just what concerns his kingdom as a whole. If each man is his own king, then what concern does he have of the world? A man in Cuba cares little for the goings-on in Australia, for example. Now, don't misunderstand me. This is not necessarily a bad thing, but it does lead to my next point. Where does the line of ignorance stop? At what point does the dream fade and reality set in? Where are humans told they need to care? As politicized as everything has become these days, I feel like the ignorant have been given too much of a voice to boast of it. And they seem proud of it to some extent. Like I said, I'm not interested in political squabble or who runs what country. Frankly, I couldn't care less. Everyone's the same to me, especially when I come to meet them. But what fascinates me is this. Logic would dictate that mankind would thrive far better by learning to coexist, to forgive each other, to accept one another. And yet, mankind is also ignorant enough to ignore this truth and logic. They choose instead to embrace the illusion of identity, by class, by race, by gender, by wealth. Why? For what purpose? It's a riddle I have yet to solve. Why must things be the way they are? Why must humanity choose to dwell in this bubble of ignorance? They can ignore their family, their neighbors, and their friends if the reality of them is not suitable to their wants. But, if you want true evidence of the ignorance of man, I can offer it by asking a simple question. How can a species that is abounding in intelligence and ingenuity look at the world they inhabit and still say to themselves, I'm bored. There's nothing here worth marveling at. Yes. In a world of ceaseless wonders, humanity invented boredom. If that's not pure ignorance, I don't think I know what is. Sincerely, Death.